Do you want to start making art, but perhaps you don't believe that you've got the skills or the creativity to do it? Let me show you a simple method to help you get started. You just need to be able to draw three simple shapes: a circle, a triangle, a square, and maybe some roughly straight lines. In the first video in this series, I showed you how to apply this in 3 stages with a still life. In this video, I'm going to show you a streetscape, and I'm going to talk a bit about some basics of perspective. I'll show you how you can quickly produce something that looks intentional, is aesthetically pleasing, and is based on reality and observation. Once you've got your materials together, draw a frame on your paper and try to make it match the proportions of the reference photo that you're working from. Measure the proportions of each side and mark them on the paper. You could use a straight edge, or you could just use the paper edges as a drawing guide. Here I'm using my hands to do the measurement, which is accurate enough, but you could also use a pair of dividers or a piece of paper that you've marked up, or a set of compasses to help you with this. Once you've got a frame drawn in, that will help give you a reference point for where to position everything else. If your drawing's the same size as the reference photo, then it'll make it easier later on to position things if you want to try to get things reasonably accurate. Next, I want to identify and draw in lightly the main perspective lines to guide the drawing. Perspective is really just the way that buildings and other objects start to look smaller as they get further away from you. And putting these lines in will help to keep that looking realistic and grounded in reality. If you extend lines that join the tops or the main features of these buildings, you'll find that they'll converge at the horizon, or at the imaginary horizon line, at what's called the vanishing point. That's the point where the building would appear to vanish from your view as you were too far away from it to see it properly. I'll use this tracing paper to help you to see how I'm visualizing these perspective lines. I'm not doing an architectural drawing, so I'm not trying to get it really precise. This is really just to give me a framework, a sort of skeleton, if you like, within which I can draw the buildings and keep them looking convincing and realistic. The effect of perspective means that the simple shapes that would fit the buildings will have to be slightly distorted, and that's what these guidelines are for. I'm just running a line along the general tops of the roofs and the main features of the buildings. If windows and doors are more important features in your drawing, you may want to just add some additional lines that go along the tops and the bottoms of doorways and windows, just to help you get those into a convincing shape. You'll see that the buildings on both sides of the road have almost a common vanishing point in the distance. So you can call this kind of setup a single point perspective, single vanishing point. Now I'm transferring them to the paper. I'm happy to do this freehand. If I wanted to do it a bit more accurately from the tracing paper, then I could just rub some pencil over the back of the tracing paper and press through that, maybe with a ball pen or a harder pencil, to transfer some of those lines to the paper. But I'm happy to do this freehand. If you find it really difficult to draw freehand straight lines, then you could, of course, use a straight edge of some kind. But I would encourage you to try to build up the skill of drawing reasonably straight lines freehand. It'll help you a lot with your drawing. The building that sticks out into the road there is face on, so there's no perspective to worry about there. So the shapes that fit with that are just simple rectangles and triangles. Now I'm filling in the basic rectangular shapes for the buildings into the perspective lines, but the perspective distorts these shapes, as I mentioned before. Let me show you on this diagram how this works. When you're looking at a building face on, you'll have a simple square or rectangle to fit the walls and the windows and the roof when you're looking at it flat. But when the building is slanting away from you, then the far end of it is going to appear shorter than the closer bit. So that's going to result in a sort of squashed rectangle. And that's where these guidelines come in useful. And doors and windows within that will follow the same kind of distortion. Because the roof is sloping away from you in two directions, then it's distorted slightly more. So you end up with this sort of a squashed diamond shape to show the roof in perspective. Again, use the perspective lines as guides to help you. If you've got a circular object in the picture, then this is going to appear as an ellipse, a squashed circle with the effect of perspective. And have a look at an earlier video in this series for more on that topic. I'm representing the tree with a few circular shapes and just adding in an imaginary trunk because you can't really see it very well in the photograph. And this helps to keep it consistent in style with the relatively simplified forms in the rest of the picture. I'm also looking at some of the other features on the street itself. There's this path which makes a bit of an S shape as it goes away into the distance, and that adds a little bit of dynamism, a little bit of a point of interest in the street. Because the photo is the same size as the drawing, then I can just use it to give me position references for each of the different shapes. And I'm just going to speed this up now to show you the process of filling in the rest of these shapes. I'm not trying to get every single detail. Remember, this is not a technical drawing. I'm trying to keep a little bit of life to this, keep it a little bit sketchy. So as the buildings get further away, I'm going to lose some of the details there, and this will help to keep the whole thing a bit simpler and make it easier to come up with a decent result. I'm just looking at the main shapes of the rooftops, some of the gable ends, which are quite nice features, and the main chimney stacks. One nice little point in the distance is that little splash of colour from what I think was a distant tree lit by the sunlight. And that makes a nice little contrast point with the shaded buildings either side of it. It makes a good focal point for the eye, which helps to draw your eye into the picture. The arrows on the road make quite nice features as well, and again help give that feeling of depth to the picture. So I've just made a point of putting those in. Now I'm just adding some of the additional details. I'm just putting in the main points, especially these nice coloured panels which when I come to adding colour to the picture, we'll add a few little points of interest colour-wise. But be discerning. You don't have to put every single thing into the picture that you're making. For the doors and windows, I'm really concentrating more on the detail of the closer ones because they're a bit more important visually. As they get further away though, you'll see that I'm very much simplifying the windows, just reducing them often to a couple of lines to indicate that there's a window or a door present. And in the far distant buildings, I'm just leaving them out altogether. These windows on the right hand side are reflecting light really strongly, and I think they make a nice feature, add a point of interest to the right hand side of the picture. So I'm making a point of putting these in, and I want to try and make sure they're emphasized when I come to color in the picture. If you're going to add anything like cars or additional figures to the picture, then remember to make sure that they also obey the same perspective. Otherwise they'll look really strange. So if you're going to add figures, especially if you're doing this from your imagination, then look at the heights of the doors and try to match the size of any people accordingly. Now for inking over the lines, I decided to use a fountain pen with some waterproof ink that would allow me, if I wanted to use some water-based colour over the top of this. Ideally, I'd have used a slightly thicker pen to get slightly more dynamic lines, but this was all I had at the time. But you could use any kind of pen. A ballpoint pen would be perfectly good for this. Alternatively, a nice dark expressive felt pen would be good as well. Useful to be discerning in the kind of details that you put in, and don't be afraid to leave out some of the details in the picture. You can always add more things if it doesn't look quite right, but often a picture can be more effective if you've actually omitted some of the clutter of the excess detail in a photograph. When it comes to the sky, I just free-handed these clouds in place just to give a bit of background, but they're not very important parts of the picture. When it came to adding colour, I decided in the end to have a go with these really cheap coloured pencils, which I've used in an earlier video, in the first one in the series, because I just wanted to try them out and see what kind of result I could get with very inexpensive materials. One of the disadvantages of these cheaper colours is that there's not quite so much pigment loading in the leads of the pencils, so it's a little bit harder to get a dense colour and to actually mix colours together by layering over the top of each other. So you have to start off working quite lightly and then gradually build them up. Making sure they're well sharpened is another good little tip. With better quality colours, it would have been easier to get denser and more saturated colour into the picture. I could have been bolder with some of these colours, but I just wanted to give you some idea of what you can achieve using this kind of approach. Just building up the picture in a set of simple stages. So there we are. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I also made a painted version of this, which I'll show you in the next video, where I demonstrate this approach to a self-portrait study.